All right. Hello, students. This is our next installment of lecture. This is lecture 3 of 4 about World War I. This one's going to be about the type of warfare that took place in World War I, specifically in Europe, Western Europe, Eastern Europe. There is sort of a southern theater of war, area of war in World War I that was predominantly a naval war in the Mediterranean. And then there's other battles that happen around the world that I don't have time to get into. But also going to talk about weapons of war in this lecture. And so I hope you're taking notes and enjoy. Should we get started and get rolling on this? So I'm not taking too much of your time. So where we left off last time, we were talking about building an army and how America had to institute a draft in order to recruit enough soldiers to go fight. We did have volunteers, and then we have what are called draftees, people that are drafted. And it's not just men. Well, men are going to be the combat soldiers, but we're also going to have women that volunteer their service as sort of bookkeepers, the typists, the messaging communications folks, and nurses as well. So it's going to be an effort from both genders to really serve the American cause for war and help us to win the war in World War I, which eventually we do, which catapults us up to a more powerful nation than we were before. But as we go to Europe, and send troops over there. The type of fighting that they encounter is what's called trench warfare. And it's really like we see this in kind of all wars, but it's going to be most glorified in World War I, most used in World War I because the weapons become more deadly after this industrialization. The second industrial revolution takes place. We're making weapons that are deadlier than ever. So how do you protect yourself if you see a guy over there that has a rifle that's able to shoot you from long distance now? Well, you're going to dig a hole and duck down. And so these holes become trenches, these long sort of trenches, ditches where you can hide out in to protect yourself from the rifles coming at you, the snipers shooting at you, the artillery coming from above, the gas being sent in. And so what do? You start living underground. And so these trenches are really how the war becomes fought throughout the duration, the 4 years that World War I is fought. Is predominantly fought from trenches. So what is going to happen is going to result in a stalemate where both sides are dug in. Okay, if you leave your side, your trench to go to the other side, you're becoming exposed to machine gun fire, to the rifles, to the artillery, to the planes, to the gas, to flamethrowers, to tanks that eventually get unveiled, and you're wholesale basically getting slaughtered and just mowed down. So you always want to go to the other side and capture the enemy. But when you're exposed to go capture the enemy, you're going to try to do so with overwhelming numbers. But what ends up happening is that most of these large numbers of men die and perish or become casualties of war because you're not able to get to the other side to destroy the other trench and the men in that other trench. So the battle lines for instance, in France are going to remain unchanged throughout the duration of the war for those 4 years. It's going to change very little. Now there are going to be, both sides are going to attack each other and have victories. And then quickly, soon thereafter, there are going to be counterattacks that push them back to pretty much the same trenches that were originally set. So tremendously disillusioned. A lot of soldiers are going to be like just pretty apathetic about the war and just kind of want to die because there's this feeling that, once the war starts, it's like, yeah, we're going to be home by Christmas. We're going to dominate. But once the war devolves into these trenches, it's really going to be a really sad existence. If you've seen the movie 1917, I encourage you to do so. It talks a lot about the trench warfare existence, especially at the beginning of that movie and what it's like. As well, there's the documentary, They Shall Not Grow Old, which was unveiled, was it 2 or 3 years ago? Which is a documentary of old pictures and film that have been remastered in today's color and put to music. It's pretty incredible to see original footage put together too. So great ways to sort of get a sense of what warfare was like in these wars. Here's a diagram of kind of the trench system, how elaborate they could be. You'd have this front line trench, and then you go back farther and you dig out other trenches. You have a support trench, you have a reserve trench. And then throughout, you have maybe high points where you have a machine gun, you have artillery in the back, and then you're kind of making your life digging out huge foxholes, is what they're called, or a dugout, in which you're going to sleep down here, cook down here, eat down here, groom yourself. Everything is going to be kind of done underground. Why? To protect yourself from the enemy that might be lobbing shells at you, firing at you, sniping at you. So your whole life kind of becomes underground. And when it rains, it's going to become nasty and muddy. The rats are going to take over. The rats are going to be even eating dead bodies here in what's called no man's land. So you see this army is attacking, but what are they going to face? Sort of the sniper men or people with rifles that are going to pop up here and shoot and kill, and machine guns are going to be mowing down people. Airplanes are going to be dropping bombs. Artillery is going to be firing. So really to make it across this line is going to be incredible feat to do so. And it does happen, but again, it's going to be quickly recaptured. So tremendously devastating war. This is why millions and millions of combat soldiers are going to lose their lives, because generals thought with overwhelming numbers they can overwhelm the other side, but come to find out it's really going to be executing themselves and their own men by trying to capture and recapture territory all the time. So, and here's just some other diagrams of what trenches would look like. There were the zigzags. So if enemy soldiers got in one end, they couldn't shoot down a straight line and kill everyone. If it was zigzag, then there's a chance that you could still defend yourself. And so that's kind of a zigzag pattern that many trenches took. Here's a trench. It's not very well established. This is pretty early in the war. And you see soldiers, still have some sort of protection. We're going to see as the war goes on, the trenches are going to be a lot deeper, a lot more elaborate, because there's going to be a lot more weapons developed to try to kill these soldiers in the trench. Like, okay, I can't shoot them with bullets because I can't see them. Well, let me lob artillery shells, which become huge explosive devices. And also artillery shells that are going to carry gas, hoping to gas these soldiers in the trenches. Tanks are going to be used to make it through no man's land here to drive all the way over to these soldiers and kill them. Okay, planes are going to be used to fly above and drop their bombs on these trenches. They're even going to have miners, especially for America. Special miners from Pennsylvania are going to be in West Virginia taken and digging trenches underneath the ground, digging lines underneath the ground and blowing up huge sort of deposits of TNT to explode a huge gap in these trenches so that we could go over and take it over. We tried it once and it worked awfully. So and it resulted in huge numbers of men dying. You could look that up if you're interested. So, and then here's the idea of a simple trench. You have the barbed wire. Again, you'd have to get through this if you're trying to attack. Very difficult to do. But then you have men in here that are able to be protected from enemy fire. So what this became a war of is not necessarily who had the best military strength, who had the best sort of military imagination or mind, who was the best general. It just became who had the most troops to continue to throw out at the other side, because you're really trying to bleed the other side out. It became a war of who has the most men is going to win the war, because they last the longest in the war. So each side believed they could win by bleeding the other side out until it had to quit. So this is why you have huge masses of armies going at each other, killing, dying, and generals and armies were willing to sacrifice thousands of lives to achieve this goal. Ultimately, for nothing, though. The war is going to end basically with the attrition of the German army. The Germans had no one left to fight because so many of their men had died and had finally been killed that they had no one left. That's why when America hops into the war in 1917, it's a huge encouragement to the British, to the French, because it gave them more men to sort of tip the balance over the Germans and sort of exhaust the German army, because they didn't have anyone left to stand up and fight against the Americans once we entered the war. Now, most of the British soldiers were already killed. Most of the French soldiers killed at that point. So as we join, we're going to outweigh sort of the numbers of the Germans, because we had fresh troops to be able to fight as they're running out of their own soldiers to be able to fight against us. And so you see the numbers of Allied casualties. So this is Britain, France, America. 22 million are going to be a casualty is a dead, wounded, or missing soldier. So not just dead, but also missing and wounded. Tremendously high numbers, 22 million casualties, dead, wounded, missing, just for the Allied side. Then the Central Powers, so this is Germany, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, Bulgaria, 15 million on their side. And you see US, 300,000 casualties for our side. So it's a huge number. And so again, this is why it was the Great War. We were never supposed to have another war this deadly, this catastrophic again, until we get to World War II, obviously. But tremendously high numbers for World War I. And then it's important to know what happens to Russia in this war. They basically collapse. They are sending their men to go fight in this war in 1914. And, they were one of the original people that went to war against Austria-Hungary, because Austria-Hungary was fighting their friend Serbia. And so the Tsar of Russia is like, yeah, we're in this war, let's go fight it. Well, what ends up happening is they have a communist revolution that happens within the country of Russia while the troops are sent out to fight and they're dying, wounded, missing. Basically there's not any energy left to continue to the fight. And what happens in that political chaos is that the communists, really for the first time, this becomes the first country that the communists ever take over in, launch their own kind of civil war revolution within Russia and gain control of government in 1917 under Vladimir Lenin, who's, maybe you've heard of him. If you go to Fremont in Seattle, they have a big statue of Lenin, because after the fall of the Soviet Union, they tried to get rid of all these statues to raise money. And so Seattle, Fremont is kind of weird like that. They ended up buying one of those statues and bringing it to Seattle. But he launches the communist revolution in Russia, which is successful. And then communism spreads amongst other countries, which is what we'll talk about in the Cold War. But Russia loses the territories and they end up gaining all those back after World War II, because they're a victor in World War II with America. So we'll talk about that more too. But here's some of the major weapons and improvements of World War I. The rifle is going to be improved. It used to be just the smooth bore musket, like in the Civil War. You have the gun and you put in the gunpowder, you pour it in. Again, you're receiving fire from other people, and then you put the bullet in, and then you got to get the ramrod and pack it down, and then you got the rifle and you got to cock it back, and you have to get the flint just right, to spark. So that is traditionally how rifles have been, but they're smooth bore muskets, right? Where that lead ball is flying out of the edge of the musket, and it gets weird spin on it, so it can go any direction, really inaccurate. I mean, you can still kill people and people are going to die with that. But what gets improved between the Civil War and World War I is this rifling, where you take the smoothbore musket and now you rifle and groove out the inside. So that bullet going through it is now going to spin sideways with centrifugal force. So it's going to make the range of rifles, it's going to increase how far and how deadly rifles are. And then also with the trench warfare we see in World War I, there's going to be bayonets or knives that you can attach to the end in case someone comes into your trench and you need to protect yourself, you run out of bullets or something. So tremendous technological achievement and advantage in World War I. The machine gun is going to be the deadliest weapon of World War I. It's the reason why we're going to see millions of people lose their lives, and it's going to change the way the war was fought. This is the reason why armies start descending out into the earth and digging trenches. It's because the machine guns are going to be able to mow down people that are coming at them. They're going to shoot 600 rounds a minute. They start off very lunky. They need 3 people. They're going to be water cooled. These systems fail. They jam a lot. And then we're going to see, as the war goes on, major improvements to the machine gun to be 2 men and air cooled. You can look that up if you're interested. Flamethrowers are going to be unveiled for the first time in World War I. Again, trying to kill the soldier that's in the trench. Well, I just run over with this big tank of gas and blow fire on them. Makes sense, but you got to get over to that trench in the first place. So this was really a psychological weapon, because if you thought a flamethrower was coming at you, you'd be scared and maybe leave your post, but it really wasn't that effective, because it can only spew fire 30 to 40 meters or yards in front of it. Again, you had to get close enough in order to throw flame at your enemy, which is very difficult to do in no man's land. So, but it was hoped that it could be used in difficult trench fighting areas. Artillery is going to see a huge improvement. Again, it's like cannons on ships, and you have cannonballs. It's the early artillery system. Well, now with that rifling technology, they start to rifle the huge cannons as well. So the artillery shells being shot to the cannons are being rifled. So the artillery shells are going a lot farther than they ever have before, and are a lot more accurate than they ever are before. And so we see these huge cannons being made with this new technology, being able to shoot, even miles away, which had never been done before. So now you can destroy the enemy and morale, hopefully, before the attack, again, trying to kill the soldier in the trench. Another advancement trying to do that, kill the soldier in the trench, is the creation of gas, specifically mustard gas developed by Germany. Was at first it was cyanide, and then eventually mustard gas was used. And you'd fill empty shells with the gas and then shoot it at the enemy, hoping to get in the trench. It would open, and then the enemy soldiers would take in this gas and die. The cyanide would literally be that sort of it would suck the oxygen out of your lungs and you'd asphyxiate. So you start to see that every army gives their soldiers gas masks, first time seen in warfare. And so you could only escape with a mask. You might live through the cyanide. So they start to develop mustard gas, which creates boils on your body and really burns your body. And if you breathe it in, it can burn your lungs, burn your face. Again, you're just trying to cripple the soldier. Maybe you might not kill him, maybe you do, but you're incapacitating the soldier so he can't fight anymore. And so mustard, again, gas becomes more of a psychological terror. It could not be seen, but you had this fear that it was out there, and that if you took your mask off, kind of like now under COVID, that you're going to become infected and really harm yourself. But it really wasn't that effective of a weapon. Armies are going to gas themselves accidentally. They're going to gas their horses accidentally, and really is not that effective, but becomes more of this psychological threat. After World War I is over, it becomes outlawed amongst all major civilized countries. Advanced countries outlaw its use ever in warfare, biological, chemical weapons after World War I, which doesn't mean that every country always abides by it, but and then tanks are going to be developed again to kill the soldier in the trench. It's the first time used, created by Great Britain. They made this Mark, was it the Mark? I can't remember what number, Mark 4 or Mark 5 tank right here. It's this trapezoid with tracks on it. It was the first effective tank. France made one with the turret that turns on the top, but they had wheels, so it continually got stuck in the mud. And so this was a cool advancement by the British to make the tracks so it could go across no man's land. Essentially, it's a big tin can on tracks that's moving, and it's so like impenetrable that you can't like shoot bullets through it. But still, I mean, it's going to have problems like you're housing an engine inside with the crew. You're keeping it contained. A lot of crews are going to die of carbon monoxide poisoning because they're not going to be able to exhaust the engine exhaust very well. They're going to be, even get stuck in the trenches. So tanks are going to be awesome in that they get unveiled and they get improved upon in World War II, but again, not very helpful or successful in World War I at killing the enemy in the trench. Okay, aerial warfare starts to be used for the first time. First flight happens in 1904 in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, with the Wright brothers. And just in 10 years' time, huge advancement in airplane flight technology. And so planes are going to be used to spy on the other side, to drop heavy bombs, of which it can only drop like 1 or 2 because the earliest airplanes weren't that powerful in sort of how many bombs they could carry. And then they're going to fight in duels called dog fights, in which planes are going to fly around trying to kill each other. And we're going to see kind of funny or sad stories, first using pistols or using rocks or using bricks to try to throw, because the wings are made out of basically fabric and paper, and then the plane body made out of wood. So very fragile. It doesn't take much to knock down an airplane. It was kind of seen as the suicide mission. And we have very famous aces, as in people that are going to kill a lot of other airplanes. Edwin von Rickenbacker is the most famous. He's known as the Red Baron. He's from Germany. But again, it's not an overwhelming influencing factor on warfare, trying to kill the enemy in the trench. Blimps also get developed. This is a Zeppelin made by Germany. They're going to try to improve upon this in World War II. But you have this huge sort of airship that's going very slow, filled with gas. All you got to do is puncture it, and it's going to peter out and fly, So not that effective, even though there's a lot of tries at aerial warfare and technology. And then U-boats is probably the most effective, besides rifles and artillery used, is we have a new type of naval warfare now, where U-boats, is based on the German word under the sea. Boats, as in submarine boats, is what we call them now. They're originally called U-boats, developed by the Germans to sink ships, both enemy ships and then civilian ships, including the Lusitania, that killed 128 Americans and gets us involved in the war. And they're going to create this new sort of underwater missile called the torpedo that is shot at the ships and strikes the ship and explodes. So it becomes very powerful and effective, and we see gets improved upon in World War II still, because it's very effective in terms of warfare. So that's where I'll stop today. I'll just stop on U-boats. I'll talk about the ending of the war in the next lecture on Thursday and Friday. Probably going to take 10 minutes for that lecture. But this is my wrap up of the weapons of World War I, as well as some of the tactics the trench warfare used, which is why it becomes such a deadly war. Now, it's cool to look at some of the technologies, but again, they weren't very effective at doing what, which is killing the enemy soldier in the trench. Very difficult to do, which is why they did it in the first place. But it's why the war is also so deadly, is leaving your trench, going to the enemy trench, going to be very costly when you get mowed down by the enemy. So that's it. So this is lecture 3 of 4. The next one, lecture 4, will come on Thursday and Friday. All right. Thanks, you guys.